Okay, well, I tried to do I turned my phone 90 degrees, but it didn't work. So I'm stuck doing it this way. If somebody wants to make a comment to try to help me, I'm getting some complaints that the videos are too small to watch on full screen because I'm doing it on an iPhone. And I'm just not technically savvy. I'm an old grandpa and I need. So if you have any suggestions on settings that I can do to this iPhone to make the video take up the full screen on YouTube, leave them in the comments and I'll do my best. Anyway, we're going to pick up where we left off in this chapter, the charagma versus the card. And we left off with this quote from this book right here, Summary of American Law by Clark. Employees see master servant this index. You're creating, when you cross over into this commercial law system to be an employee, it's a type of equitable conversion, basically. Okay, so let's move on. Here we see this quote from Jerry Spence, who's an old country attorney. I think he's from Montana or Idaho or somewhere, Wyoming maybe. He's got some pretty good books out there to read. He says, quote, "People have not yet discovered they have been disenfranchised. Even lawyers can't stand to admit it. In any nation in which people's rights have been subordinated to the rights of the few, in any totalitarian nation, the first institution to be dismantled is the jury. I am afraid." Again, footnote 692, and that's Jerry Spence. Now, I want to focus on this. This thing to be dismantled is the jury. I don't know if Jerry is understanding this or not. I'm sure he does. He's a pretty smart guy. When you cross over into that commercial law jurisdiction, the jury is advisory. This is why the judge will give the jury instructions. You are here to determine the facts. I'm here to give the law. Okay, the jury is merely advisory. It's just there to help the judge to determine the facts of the case. The jury is no longer a common law jury. It is not a jury of allodial freemen that decide both fact and law. It's just a jury, an advisory jury in the commercial law jurisdiction to determine facts. Now, you could still nullify, but man, that's going to bring up a whole hornet's nest of. In what jury nullification is you find someone innocent who's guilty because you don't agree with the law that they were charged with. But when you do that in a maritime court, that's you're usurping your authority there. You're judging the law and not just the facts. So that'll throw a judge into a hissy fit. And let's look at some case sites, and I'll show this out, prove this out to you. This one here, this is from some old common law procedural books. The technicalities, or just legal books, I should say, not common law. The technical niceties of the common law are not regarded when we're dealing with admiralty courts. A jury does not figure ordinarily in the trial of an admiralty suit. Okay, so mostly in admiralty, you're going to see bench trials with just a judge. Think of tax court, think of your divorce court, think of, traffic court, those kind of things. Do you get a jury of your peers? No, those are bench trials. The verdict of the jury. So when there is a jury in a commercial law case under maritime law, and you'll see the flag back there. Patriots like to make a big deal out of this, that gold fringe flag. Well, yeah, that's a sign of maritime law, but here in the U.S., maritime law goes everywhere commerce goes. So it's okay to have that flag in a court. they have that subject matter jurisdiction. Okay? So when there is a verdict, if there's a jury here, it's merely advisory, determining the facts. You're advising the judge to the facts that you see in the case. And people like this because it's not just leaving it up to the judge to determine the facts. You're trying to sway this jury to the facts. And attorneys are very good at manipulating juries with their little shows that they put on. And may be disregarded by the court. Okay, so even if the jury does come back, the judge can throw that out. Okay, he doesn't have to listen to this advisory jury. And we'll see, that goes on. The rules of practice may be altered whenever found to be inconvenient or likely to embarrass the business of the court. There it is. Why does the judge disregard? Well, because you're not doing what you should be doing here. And it's inconvenient and embarrassing. A court of admiralty acts upon equitable principles. Okay. So now let me pull something else up here. Here's this. I've shown you this before. I remembered where this was. It's homo liber. This is a definition of a free man. An allodial proprietor, as distinguished from a vassal or feudatory. A free man, lawfully, now we're talking about common law here, competent to act as a juror. The common law juror. Not this maritime, commercial, civil law juror where you're just deciding facts. This is a boss who's able to determine both facts and law, where the judge in this case, in these juries, in this court, common law court, is merely a referee. He has no real authority other than to make sure that things proceed equitably as fair for both parties. He's not deciding law, the jurors are. Okay, you're not in that situation anymore. Okay, let's take a deeper dive here. And we'll look at some older cases. This comes from 1832. This is Judge Baldwin in the case of Baines versus the schooner James and Catherine. It says, but there is no middle ground on which to place such jurisdiction. He's talking about this admiralty jurisdiction. When we once break over the line which restrained it by acts of parliament and prohibitions, we'll get to that here in a second, we are necessarily thrown back on the civil law and the royal prerogative, the whims of the court, the whims of the king, the whims of these human rulers. That's why God told you not to do this. For the rules and principles on which the right of trial by jury depends. See, he's talking the same thing that Jerry Spence was talking about. It is in vain to contend that the Seventh Amendment, federal constitution here, will be any efficient guarantee for this right, the common law jury, in suits at common law. If an admiralty jurisdiction exists in the United States, he's talking about bringing it on land like it's being brought here by 1832, commensurate with what is claimed by the claimant in this case. Its assertion is, in my opinion, a renewal of the contest between legislative power, positive law, civil law, and royal prerogative, i.e., same thing, and the common law, the common and the civil law striving for mastery. These two systems fighting with each other as to which one the people are going to choose that they want the most. One of them is going to drag you into the mark of the beast, and the other one starts bringing you back towards the law of God and having the mark of YHWH. The one to secure, the other to take away the trial by jury. And until the authoritative judgment of a higher court shall make it my duty to surrender my judgment to their decree, it will never be sanctioned by me. So he's doing what he can to slow down this admiralty jurisdiction here in 1832. Now let's take a look before we move on to Ramsey versus Allegre. Let's look at American jurisprudence here real quick. What this is coming from is from one of those books up there in these green books here, which is a set of American legal encyclopedias. This is called AmJur for short, or American Jurisprudence. This is 2D, Volume 2, page 720, the entry on admiralty. Section 1, Origin and Nature of Admiralty. And I've gone over this before in the video way back at the beginning of this playlist about admiralty and commerce. The historical development of admiralty jurisdiction and procedure is of practical as well as theoretical interest, since opinions in admiralty cases frequently refer to the historical background in reaching conclusions on the questions at issue. The special jurisdiction of admiralty has a maritime purpose and is different from common law. No kidding. It is not exclusively rooted in the civil law system, although it includes substantial derivations therefrom. Okay, so remember, the civil law is really positive law, which is statutory law that comes from legislative or lawmaking bodies like legislatures or kings. But this maritime law, yeah, it takes a lot from that, but it's also these cases in maritime courts going back to, in our modern iteration, it goes back to at least the Isle of Rhodes, a long time ago. Kind of like common law, there's a lot of these customs and usages that carry through. So it's not exclusively rooted in the civil law system. It has a strong international aspect, but it may undergo independent changes in the several countries that have an admiralty law, and such international features are given serious consideration by admiralty courts. Okay, now this is where we're getting into some of the weeds here to kind of see what's happened. By the end of the 17th century, the admiralty jurisdiction in England had been restricted until it was not as extensive in other European maritime countries like, the Dutch, even France, Portugal, Spain, due to a long controversy in which the common law courts, with the aid of Parliament, English civil law now, the English common law, English civil law, had succeeded in limiting the jurisdiction of admiralty to the high seas, the high tide mark. Now, the way it really worked was wherever the first bridge was. So if you kind of headed up in a boat with a bunch of commercial stuff on board, say like from the mouth of the Thames River, the first bridge you came to that you couldn't get under was where the admiralty stopped. So over here in the American English colonies, we just stopped it at the high tide mark. Okay? That was when we were still British colonies. All right? So it was restricted to the high seas and excluding its jurisdiction from transactions arising on waters within the body of a country, rivers and lakes. So if a contract was made even on a river or a lake, it wasn't maritime law within the body of the country. It was still under common law, the law of the land, even though it was on water. They limited the law of the sea, out to the sea at the high tide mark. Okay, but what happened here in the U.S., the development of admiralty in the U.S.? We didn't limit it. I'll tell you right now. We said, no, wherever you want to bring admiralty is fine. On land, good. It's all right. It's all about the subject matter. The admiralty jurisdiction system was brought to America by British settlers, along with the common law and equity. Equity just follows both forms of law. It's just what's just, right, and fair. Basically, it's like this. There's no remedy specifically mentioned in the law, whether that's common law or this maritime law. So the judge has to devolve onto equity to determine what's just, right, and fair for the parties. So a great example of this is Solomon and the two women fighting over who's the mother of the child, the caregiver to a child. There's nothing in the law of God that even comes close to determining what happens when two women are fighting over who's the mother of a child. It's absurd on its face for the most part. So God didn't cover that. Well, how do you solve this problem then when it comes up? It devolves onto equity. And Solomon, as the king, had to decide how to determine who has the best interests of the child at heart. Now, we think it's the mother, but we don't know for sure. It doesn't say. That's not what he was doing. He was determining who has the best interests of the child at heart so that everybody, all parties, including the child, is done justice, what's righteous, what's fair. The courts for the administration of the maritime law were commissioned in many, if not all, of the colonies. These tribunals continued to exercise the power conferred upon them until the organization of the federal government in 1787. And that's because the original 13 colonies were all, basically states that bordered along the Atlantic Ocean. So they had this issue of dealing with maritime law up to the high tide mark. Now, before the adoption of the Constitution, jurisdiction in admiralty maritime cases was distributed between the confederation of the individual states. But when the Constitution of the United States was framed, a system of exclusive federal admiralty jurisdiction was incorporated, placing the entire subject, substantive as well as procedural, under national control because of its intimate relation to navigation and to interstate and foreign commerce. Bingo. Now the provision in the Constitution did not abrogate the maritime law theretofore in force, but it just incorporated it. The maritime law became law of the United States rather than each individual state. Subject to the paramount power of Congress, because in Article 1, Section 8, Congress has exclusive and plenary power over interstate and foreign commerce. Why? Because it has nothing to do with common law. Congress can make whatever rule they want to alter, qualify, or supplant it as experience and changing conditions might require. What are these changing conditions? Well, when we were English colonies, we followed the English common law, which had limited the admiralty to the high tide mark. Here in the United States, we said, no, we don't want to do that. We're free men. Some of us are commercial men. We want to bring this admiralty on land. So we're gonna do it wherever we bring admiralty in our contracts. The subject matter of admiralty, well, admiralty can go there. We're smart enough to decipher these two. Yeah, way back when. But you're not taught this anymore. You're not taught how to decipher these forms of law. The only ones I can think of that most Americans can understand clearly because they still have it is do you understand the difference between your civil law and the martial law, the Uniform Code of Military Justice? If a soldier goes into the Marines or the Army or the Air Force or whatever, is he under a different form of law with a different jurisdiction and different rules and different access to rights and all that? Of course. Well, same thing here with this maritime law. When you go into being an employee or an employer in commerce. So, subject only to constitutional and treaty limitations. And those aren't many, kids. The power of Congress is paramount in matters of maritime law. And it was exercised at an early date when Congress, I need to scroll up here. When Congress enacted the Judiciary Act of 1789, conferring on the federal district courts the exclusive jurisdiction of seizures under law of impost, navigation, or trade of the United States, and made on navigable waters within the respective districts. Okay, so originally, for a very brief period of time, Admiralty stayed kind of with that high tide mark. But look at this. This jurisdiction has since been modified and enlarged by numerous enactments. When Congress passes a federal law, what constitutional provision do, I would say probably 90, maybe even 95% of the acts of Congress cite as their constitutional authority to make this law? Commerce Clause. That's where they have this exclusive power. And this ties into this mark. Which system are you using? Remember, what's the origin of these two forms of law? All right? This mark is, this thing is all encompassing. And people just don't realize that they've already got it. Okay, let's take a look at Ramsey versus Allegre now. Here it is again. This is back in 1827 with Justice Johnson of the U.S. Supreme Court writing. He said, I concur with my brethren in sustaining the decree below, but cannot consent to place my decision upon the ground on which they have placed theirs. I think it's high time to check the silent and stealing progress of the Admiralty in acquiring jurisdiction to which it has no pretensions. Unfounded doctrines ought to at once be met and put down, and dicta, as well as decisions that cannot bear examination, ought not to be evaded and permitted to remain on the books to be commented upon and acquiesced in by courts of justice, or to be read and respected by those whose opinions are to be formed upon books. Talking about, case law books, when you go to look up old cases. It affords facilities for giving an undue bias to public opinion. Oh boy, he nailed it. Remember, I've talked about, libera res publica, free from things public. This commerce is all public business. It's open to the public. You publish your public hours. It's like a public house versus a private house. Think about that for a minute. If you wanted to go to an inn or a pub or something like that, those are all public houses under a different set of rules because they're dealing in commerce. They're ruled over by the king, not the common law. Your whole system now is pretty much run by public policy. You go to public schools, you drive on public roads, you got public parks and public right-of-ways and public libraries and public. Everything you do is out in public. And I will add of interpreting doctrines which belong not to the law. I have now said a great deal on this subject, and I could not have said less and discharge the duty which I feel I owe to the community. I am fortifying a weak point in the wall of the Constitution. Every advance of the Admiralty is a victory over the common law, a conquest gained upon the trial by jury. I'm going to skip down here. Congress has indeed given a power to issue prohibitions to a district court when transcending the limits of the Admiralty jurisdiction. Okay, so, the courts could restrain this, but they don't. This is what Judge Johnson is telling us. And he goes on, he says, but who is to issue a prohibition to us, the federal judges, if we should ever be affected with a partiality for that jurisdiction? I therefore hold that we are under a peculiar obligation to restrain the Admiralty jurisdiction within its proper limits. That in case of contracts, it has no jurisdiction at all in personam, except as incident to the exercise of its jurisdiction in rem. Ouch. Even though he's trying to warn you, he still sees that America is a free country. So, jurisdiction in rem, the thing, subject matter. So, it doesn't have any jurisdiction at all over you in persona unless, except, has incident to its exercise of its jurisdiction in rem or in the subject matter. So, if you want to engage in commerce, you're now doing the in rem thing that pulls your person into that jurisdiction, and now in persona jurisdiction exists. Free will choices, kids. Choose you this day whom you're going to serve, right? As Joshua warned us. Now let's take a look at Justice Taney back in 1851 before the Civil War. He said, and I've covered this one before, this power is as extensive upon land, and he's talking about that power over commerce, as it is on water. The Constitution makes no distinction in that respect. Ouch. And if the admiralty jurisdiction in matters of contract and tort which the courts of the United States may lawfully exercise on the high seas can be extended to the lakes under the power to regulate commerce, it can, with the same propriety and upon the same construction, be extended to the contracts and torts on land when the commerce is between different states. Okay? So it can go anywhere commerce goes. Now think about this today. How much intra-state commerce are you doing? Just commerce within the state. Especially you landlocked states like I'm in Iowa. Yeah, we've got the Mississippi River on one side, we got the Missouri River on the other, but we don't have any seaports. How much of the goods that come into Iowa, even raw materials, say there's a manufacturer here in Iowa, came from some other state or foreign nation through interstate and foreign commerce before that manufacturer even here in Iowa could even process those raw goods and turn it into something they wanted to sell intrastate here. Think of Walmart. Where does most of that stuff from Walmart come from? It comes from around the world. Vietnam, China, Taiwan, Korea, all over the place. So it's shipped on a shipping container, comes here, gets offloaded at the Port of Long Beach or somewhere else, put on a semi-truck, driven on an interstate commercial highway, down to a U.S. highway, down to your local Walmart store in Topeka, Kansas, and offloaded. And you think that Admiralty Maritime stops at the high tide mark? No, kids. It follows that whole thing because of the in rem jurisdiction that Judge Johnson told us about. Okay. This is how far we've fallen. Okay. See if there's anything else in here. Oh, this was a good one. Just point this one out. Again, speaking about this kind of spreading of the Admiralty. This is Judge Ware, U.S. District Court judge out of Maine, in the Huntress case in 1840. He says, but for 7 years, we hear no word of complaint from any district in the Union of this part of the act, something that Congress did. If it was so gross and palpable a violation of the Constitution, as it certainly was if the words of this clause are to be measured by the sense which they had in England, and not by that which they had in this country. See, they're kind of confused. Yeah, back when we were English colonies, this kind of stuff stopped at the high tide mark. It's not really the case here. We may very well ask with some feelings of surprise, where during these 7 years were slumbering the watchmen of our American Israel? Ooh, ouch. Man, Asher Ware is getting it. He's telling you, he's like, look, you guys who are wanting this common law, but you didn't stop it by yourself. You're the ones with the power to contract. Why are you bringing this in? But now you're bitching, moaning, and complaining about it because you didn't like what's happened. But where were you before? Why did you do this before? Why did you allow this foreign and alien jurisdiction of law to come onto land? You did it to yourself. And now you're so knee deep in it, you're wondering, how do I get out of this? Okay? Back to the book here real quick. The man who gives me employment, which I must have or suffer, That man is my master, Lord. Let me call him what I will. Footnote 695. Henry George, Social Problems, Chapter 5. To employ is defined as to give occupation to. We employ whatever we take into our service or make subservient to our convenience for a time. We use whatever we entirely devote to our purpose. 696. The Volume Library, 1924. See, you've allowed yourself to become this servant being used by the Babylonian system, by that whore riding the beast. The tax, which is described in statute as an excise, is laid with uniformity throughout the United States as a duty, an impost, or an excise upon the relation of employment. 697. Stewart Machine Company versus Davis, 301 U.S. 548, 1937. Let me pull up a couple more here. We'll go into case sites. Give me a second here, hopefully my, okay, let's come down here and look at Diefendorf versus Galay out of the Idaho Supreme Court. Excises in their original sense were something cut off from the price paid on the sale of goods as a contribution to support government. Again, this is dealing with commerce now. Government has that right in commercial. It's like the right of the king. The word has, however, come to have a broader meaning and includes every form of taxation which is not a burden laid directly upon persons or property. See, none of your taxes, they're all excise. You think that you're paying direct taxes like your property tax or your income tax. You're not. These are privileges. You're exercising a privilege, not exercising a right. Therefore, you've got to pay tribute to the master. Excise is a form of tribute to your master. Remember, as an employee, you're in a master-servant relationship. In other words, excise includes every form of charge imposed by public authority for the purpose of raising revenue upon the performance of an act, the enjoyment of a privilege, or the engaging in an occupation. This is a commercial term. Occupation is something done in the stream of commerce, corporate capacity, as a numbered registered with a SSN, EIN, TIN. Okay? See what else we got here. A couple more for, let's see, the income. Here back again from Diefendorf versus Galay. Whoever wrote these opinions in Diefendorf-Galay was pretty straightforward. Income is necessarily the product of the joint efforts of the state and the U.S. and the recipient of the income, the employee, the employer, both. The state furnishing the protection necessary, enabling, they're creating the stream of commerce for you, to enable the recipient to produce, receive, and enjoy the income. And a tax thereon, in the last analysis, is simply a portion cut from the income and appropriated by the state as its share. It's tribute. Okay? Doyle versus Mitchell. The act employs the term income in its natural and obvious sense as importing something distinct from principal or capital. Okay? You're not in common law with the lodial title. You're over here dealing in this paper money stuff and conveying the idea of gain or increase arising from corporate activities. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, if you're going to act like a corporation, you're going to be treated like one. And that's what you've done with your Social Security number and entering into the stream of commerce. One more I think is kind of enlightening here. See if I can find it. Is it? Oh, I can't find it. Oh, here it is. I think it's, is it Deluvio versus Boyd? No, that's maritime contracts. Okay, never mind. Sorry about that. All right, let's see. This is in Samuel 8. And he said, he will take your sons. Okay, this is God warning the people. You know, when they ask for a king, an earthly king to rule over them instead of him ruling in their hearts and minds as free souls under God. So he said, he will take your sons and appoint them for himself, human resources. And he will appoint him captains over thousands and captains over 50s, and he will set them to reap his harvest and to make his instruments of war and instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters, and he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the tenth of your seed and of your vineyards and give to his officers and to his servants. And he will take your men servants and your maid servants and your goodliest young men and your asses and put them to his work. Remember Tax Freedom Day? How long do you work for the government? He will take the tenth of your sheep and ye shall be his servants. What's that say? Employees see master servant. Oh, yeah. And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which you have chosen, you voted for, you elected to have. Oh, ouch. And Yahuwah will not hear you in that day. Ouch. I think that's a good place to leave it off. Why isn't he hearing you? You got a different mark, kids. You're going the wrong way. And he's going to let you, like a good parent should. Do you ever just save your kid from something that's going to teach them an important lesson if they suffer through the consequence and get thumped? It's not that Yahuwah doesn't love us. He's going to let us play this out until we are thumped. He's not going to come in and save us. We did this to ourselves. We got to go through it. To understand, you got to let go of all this crap you've been carrying around thinking you're a believer. Okay? This is why it's so easy to fool. Right? Remember that somewhere in there it talks about even the saints might get sucked into this. Ow. Ooh. That should scare the living bejesus out of all of you. It does me. Because I'm not a saint. Okay? All right, you guys take care of yourselves. We'll see you in the next one.